session yielded my favorite quote of the entire event, which came from Nicole Rice from Doc's Dermatology. And she said something I think none of us were expecting. Everybody in the audience was like, what? She said, we teach our staff to sound as good as our AI. Hey everyone, and welcome to Deep Learning with PolyAI. So we're here to help CX leaders get a window into the latest and greatest developments in AI. So if you've been with us for a while, you might remember me. I started this podcast about 2 years ago with our CEO and co-founder, Nicola. But if you're just joining or if you haven't seen me in a while, hi, I'm Michelle Schroeder. I'm Poly's CMO. And before we get started, just a reminder to subscribe, give us a like on YouTube, leave us a nice rating on whatever podcast app you're listening in from. And now I'm super excited to be welcoming to our podcast today a very special guest. It is our Chief Product Officer, Christopher Osborne. So Christopher has 2 decades of experience building and scaling world-class product organizations. Most recently, he helped transform DBell from a 50-person startup into a 3 billion, 1,000-person plus company. He's also led major product organizations at Booking.com, served as an advisor to the UK government on digital and data strategy, and now he's with us helping to build the future of conversational AI. Welcome to the show, Christopher.
Well, hello, Michelle, and thank you for such a kind and generous intro. I think I'm going to copy paste that, and I'm going to have other people introduce me the same way because that was really very kind. But no, so happy to be here. It's such an exciting space to work in. I've developed a habit, I think, of going to places where they're at the forefront of what's going on, but where there's already, or we're seeing scaled adoption. And that's exactly what I saw with Poly. Everybody's talking about agents. I think if you had a word counter for agentic in most of the keynote speeches we're seeing at big tech conferences now, it's off the charts.
Yep.
But I found you guys, and apart from, of course, being attracted to the team and thinking I like these people, the challenge is just so exciting of actually doing it for real, and being in there with big companies and actually having really scale with agentic AI. So it's a great place to be, and I'm very happy to be here.
I could not agree more. Could not agree more. And we're so, so excited and lucky to have you with us and helping us scale that. I remember, so I joined Poly about 3 years ago, and the big word on the street, your big kind of word that got repeated over and over at tech, keynotes then was generative. And so obviously that's still very much a part of what we do, but we are just as guilty as every other kind of tech leader in using the word agentic to describe what we do. And so I guess I'll just kick off with what Nicola left us with at our keynote last week at VOX, at our annual event VOX. He was talking about the agentic enterprise. And just given you've got this really kind of perfect dual experience of working directly at an enterprise, Booking.com, like one of the biggest companies in the world, and working with us in the forefront of building this for companies like Booking.com. I'm just curious, like what the agentic enterprise means to you.
Oof. By the way, there's a beautiful edit on YouTube. I think it's with Sundar at Google I/O, where they edit together every time he says the words generative AI, and it goes on for about 3 minutes. And I quite happily shared that with my team before we went on stage at Vox to get a bit of competitive spirit about the rise of agentic AI. If I think about agentic enterprise, um, I'm quite a simple and straightforward person, and I think the real art of being good at product management is taking something very complicated and being able to make it simple or at least be able to turn it into blocks that are simple to comprehend, and then we can go and build those different blocks and get to actually a complicated end state. And I think agentic enterprises are happening. It will evolve over a long period of time. One of my favorite charts is this cloud adoption chart, where if you were like me, you started tinkering around with AWS 2008, maybe something like 2008 was when it first came out. And of course, if you were um, a startup person and playing around in your bedroom with tech, you were playing with AWS in 2008. If we fast forward almost 17 years and you look at the adoption charts of cloud and AWS, I think we're over the 50% mark. Maybe it's 50 or 60%, and that's a 17-year journey. So that shows how long it takes to really gain traction and adoption, and then scale use cases in different enterprises. So
Absolutely.
we're happening a lot faster, but I also assume we're on a decade-long journey to get there. And the different parts of the journey are really as simple as people, process, and product. Yeah, it's as simple as we're at the stage where we have tech and products which genuinely work, right? You can apply them to existing workflows and you can automate 80 to 90% of it, which for all of us is a huge, huge win in terms of productivity. We're there with the tech. In terms of people and process, this is probably the gnarly part right now, and what we should pay attention to as somebody who's producing the technology of how do you get it into the hands of people who are not domain experts and who have not got a PhD in LLM fine tuning, and then also how do we actually make it work in a business workflow and process. And for me, it's a lot clearer what the product looks like for for agentic enterprises, and we're now all trying to figure out what it looks like in terms of how do I build this into my workflows, and then how do I have the right people and the right teams and the right processes so we get the most value from this.
Absolutely. I think one of the lucky things about us last week is, obviously we are the tech company, you are the product leader, and you're saying the tech is there. People and process obviously are still to come, but we had a lot of people on stage with us last week, talking about how they've been able to integrate this into their workflows, how they've been able to extract a lot more value. And a lot of people shared with us at our annual event last week the things that surprised them, the big successes that sort of came out of adopting this technology and embracing this technology. And so I just want to talk a little bit about that. So we had a couple of industry panels. Our first one being a hospitality panel with Nadir Keem from Seminole Hard Rock, Stephanie Wheeler from Boyd, and Brian Jeppesen from Fertitta Entertainment. And these leaders all talked about some of the hurdles that they had to face, adopting this tech and bringing it in and getting people to be excited about AI when AI was being so heavily associated with the notion of replacing people. And they said, basically unilaterally, it's not about replacing people, it's about protecting the guest experience. And I really liked something that Nadir said, which is that, his job with this technology is to make the service channel feel like the resort. And then just adding to that, Brian Jeppesen said something, which is that, we sell fun. We're in the business of selling fun. So how do you do that? How do you think about success in the service channel, success of the technology, really representing the brand and bringing fun and bringing sort of the spirit of the resort? How do you do that from a technology standpoint?
Yeah, on that note, I worked in hospitality, I guess, or as part of hospitality for 6 years. And I think it's a great industry for us to look at and learn from, particularly where we're working, because for them, the customer experience is what they are selling at the end of the day. So you are selling an experience in a resort, in a room, in a casino, or in a restaurant. Um, and what I learned from the hospitality business is that they are very passionate about that. Um, and it's also a key emotional part as well, because if you get that wrong, um, people will very loudly talk about this online and in different forums. Um, and guess what? It's just this is your day job is providing this experience, so people really care about it in these industries. So I think it's a
Absolutely.
very good place to start and to look at. And yes, we're fortunate enough to have some very big names and some strong customers from that group at the event.
Yeah. One thing, that was interesting that came up in a couple other sessions is that, AI has given companies like hospitality where they're competing on experience, they're competing on how people feel in their resorts, and I guess the extent of how much fun they're able to bring to people. But just that consistency allows you to scale what's good at a very, very like high degree to a very high degree. But what if that consistency also brings sameness to the industry? A lot of folks, especially, not us, but they're leveraging a lot of the same exact underlying technologies to do what they do. And so one of the big things that came up was, how do you tune this to your brand? How do you make sure that you're scaling what's specific and unique to you as a company? And I think what was interesting is that, we had a banking session, like a FinServe session following, where they too, just like hospitality, they're competing on experience. They're competing on that personal touch, because that's really what they have. Financial instruments are what they are. And so we had Metro Bank's Lee Prothero on our stage with us, and he talked about his vision. And he said, what we've done is put a bank in every customer's pocket. And what we'll be able to do soon is put a banker in every customer's pocket with this technology. How do you see that kind of proactive relationship evolving, I guess, across other industries?
Yeah, I think if I try and generalize it, and by the way, I got excited talking about the hospitality industry and then didn't quite answer your question, Michelle. So let me try and pull that back and then also integrate it with what you just asked me. I think in general, there's a couple of points going on here. And in product speak in CPO or PM world, we love to talk about frictionless experiences, right?
Mm.
So if your app, let's say if you are Metro Bank or another, relatively modern bank, you're really, and they actually founded it on the principle of we can give people a much easier and frictionless experience with the mobile app. That was
Yeah.
the big game changer in tech from what 2010 onwards or something like this. 2000 was okay. Now we've got mobile apps, and that in itself was a revolution in that you could put actually an incredibly powerful computer in somebody's pocket, and it didn't feel like a computer. And then this opened up, a frictionless, or shall we say, much less friction-like experience than going to your traditional bank. That was enough to have this new breed of experience, let's just say mobile apps, and then also a new breed of businesses like the neo-banking, fintech experiences where you've had, huge players like Metro Bank really come around from people just saying, you know what, we can take a lot of the services you used to have queue up for, put that in your pocket. You can do it in a couple of taps. Already a huge breakthrough. And now, as was pointed out, we're opening up a kind of intelligence where you can interact and get much more and get fully professional-like customized information, which is highly relevant for you. And that's where I think he was going. And the same is for where we're going with agents. We are trying to produce a multimodal experience where whenever you need the support or whenever you need to reach out and contact or just perhaps answer something, that we're there. And this opens up and changes the nature of the relationship from fully inbound, reactive, and frankly a pain point for a lot of businesses, right? Like if somebody has, I'm not a fan of picking up the phone and calling people. I've happily got used to texting and using the web for the vast, so I'm not a big fan of picking up the phone. But if I do pick up the phone, it's because something is not working or I really need something, and I'm reaching out. I'm reaching out to that company and saying something is wrong and I need assistance. The agents we have now are, as of now, really able to work in any channel. We're working towards things like persisting memory across different channels. You call, you hit a web form, perhaps you send an SMS, and it's not a disjointed experience, but we know the customer who is working with us, the relevant data is in the right place, so that the agents have the context, and we're not restarting conversations. We are continuing an engagement, and hopefully being part of that relationship with their customer. And yeah, just like the mobile phone has enabled companies like Metro Bank and others to have a much better customer experience, the future and what we can see coming quite rapidly, and again, you can have a good idea of what's coming in the next 2 years, but unless you are a Steve Jobs, like nobody's really 100% sure how it crystallizes. But we have 800 million, which is probably bigger now, people interfacing with ChatGPT, and that's just one of these services. So it's easily 1 billion people worldwide every week is interfacing multiple times with a generative AI product to get information, but also now to perform tasks.
Yeah, and enterprises have been adopting two channels basically as long as they've been popping up. I mean, so we see, like, even just from a marketing perspective, as new things arise, whether it's AR or TikTok, you figure out how to meet people where they are and where they want to be. And you talked about earlier, sort of the people, the process, the technology. In that people category is the consumer. And what we're seeing with that 800 million people interfacing with ChatGPT every single day is this embracing of this technology of conversational AI and like the desire to sort of interface with agents. And so enterprises are in this like really, really great position to take advantage of these emerging channels. If we don't know what it's going to be. Maybe it is like the assistant, Siri becoming that interface between you and the brand. Who knows? That's not for us to predict right now. It's just for us to be there to design that agentic future and make sure that the enterprise has a place in it. But, just going back to something that you said earlier about, the relevance of the information that the person's getting, the mobile app, like the app in your pocket, the banker in your pocket, back to Metro Bank's quote. Really the theme of all of that, the thing that makes it embraceable technology or an embraceable future is access. And so just, thinking about patient access and thinking about our healthcare panel that we had last week as well, where they were all talking about how our technology has made it easier for them to give patients access to care, partially because they're not waiting on hold for a nurse that has a million other things to do than answer the front office phone, or somebody who's running late for an appointment and can tell an agent that as they're driving, that they're in traffic and they might be late. So they can slot in somebody else 15 minutes earlier. That is super interesting. And it also that session yielded my favorite quote of the entire event, which came from Nicole Rice from Doc's Dermatology. And she said something I think none of us were expecting. Everybody in the audience was like, what? She said, we teach our staff to sound as good as our AI. It's like my mind-blowing quote, and it's such a great endorsement of what we do, but also of the technology. What do you think? Is that something that you thought you'd hear, I guess, as you were joining from DeepL?
Yes, So
Answer.
I,
Lord.
well, first, it is wonderful to hear it because you absolutely want that to be validated by the end consumer and of course our customer. So of course, wonderful to hear it. Um, we are seeing things progress so fast. Um, and I've been in from the beginning in this space, really, actually, always around this space for 20 years now. We had the thing we used to call big data, when suddenly we had these huge internet-sized data sets, but you could then process them like very fast. We had machine learning and breakthroughs there and some scaled use cases. I was working with neural networks, and then suddenly the LLM breakthrough happened. And I have been in the space, and yet I was astonished by how fast things have progressed in the last 2.5 years. It's I think the best story I heard actually was that the two co-founders of Google had founded the company as an AI company, um, and was super into like what they could build with AI, etc. They built a search engine. They learned how to scrape the web. They built in a fairly simple algorithm based on clicks and then ranking from it, and then gave up on the AI dream because they had a super interesting business and built some of the best technology in the world. They founded an AI company and they actually gave up on AI and said, yeah, we just don't think this is going to happen. Until about the mid 2010s, when you started to see, maybe 2015, 2016, some machine learning breakthroughs. But it was they gave up on it, and then suddenly a few things moved, and then things really happened. And then even then, this last 2.5 years has just been so surprising at how quickly we've moved. So
Amazing.
yes, I did expect to see actually people say, you know what, the AI can perform better than humans. I did expect to see that, but it's wonderful to have it endorsed. And yes, the very interesting thing is I can look 12 months to 2 years into the future, and I can see, oh, actually, some of the things which were groundbreaking for us 2.5 years ago, when I wasn't here, but I could see that you adopted them 2.5 years ago, is already becoming last generation tech. And as part of my job is to balance the investment of building scalable and trustworthy, secure systems for now, but then also investing in what will actually replace this generation. And I think within 12 months, the agentic capabilities that we work with now will have sufficiently advanced where nobody's really talking about generative AI anymore.
I agree.
And it's the agents will have reached, maybe they haven't reached the 800 million adoption mark, but there'll be a curve and it's rapidly advancing on how people are using these things in everyday life.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're rapidly encroaching on that 800 million number, just thinking about the amount of calls that we take every single year. So I agree. I think this is going to happen. I think we're going to be surprised by the rate of change in the underlying technology. But the thing that I think really cleared the path for us and just made adoption so much easier. And like you talk about, removing friction in like in the experience, like we saw a lot less friction in the sales process, partially just because of that consumer embrace that we were talking about earlier, the consumer embrace of technology and agentic technology. um, we could probably talk about anything for a lot longer than we did today, but it was just so great having you on. We will definitely do more in the future. Thanks for being with us today, for sharing some of your predictions. May they be Steve Jobsian in their accuracy. And then for anybody that does want to check out last week's VOX, there is a on-demand recording. You just head over to our site, poly.ai, register, and you can watch it right then and there. And please subscribe if you haven't already to our podcast, and we appreciate you being with us today.